I want to begin then today by saying this. I am sharing my perspective. I'm sharing my experiences. I'm sharing what I've read and studied and what I have drawn to be the conclusions that have worked in my life and that have seemed to offer value to others. But there is without a doubt the likelihood that I'm going to say something that you don't agree with. Some of you are experts in things I'm not expert in. For example, when we had the conversation about learning differences, one of the things that came back to me after I completed that scope was that some of you who are so well schooled in it felt worried that perhaps I was somehow undermining the nature of a clinical diagnosis. So today I wanted to correct that impression. I don't mind clinical diagnoses at all. I think for young children in particular, they can be extremely valuable. Rita Sabasco, who works with me, recommends early intervention for things like dysgraphia and dyslexia. So I am not going to sit here and say, pretend it's not happening. I was going by advice that was specific to my relationship with Noah at the time that we did not test him for ADD. And when we did test him for ADD later in high school, he actually didn't show up with it because he was really borderline. And he was not in a traditional school environment, so all the questions didn't apply to him. His locker wasn't a mess. He didn't turn in homework late. There were no due dates he was having a hard time meeting. So in his case, our homeschool environment really nourished and nurtured the kind of person that he was, and a diagnosis would not have helped us. On the flip side, Liam's dysgraphia was a true issue, and I did get a diagnosis. And then I did spend some time waiting for his cooperation before we started therapy, because I know him, and I knew his personality, and I knew we needed that. But none of that may be true for you and your kids. So I just want to put that out there. You will know things I don't know. You will make choices that I didn't make. But I'm here to support you. I'm not here to judge you. And you're free to disagree with me. In fact, last week someone showed me a grammar mistake I made in one of the Aero products. I'm not perfect. There are things about me that are in process, just like there are things about you that are in process. And what I understood back at 35 was different than 45 and is now different again at 54, nearly 54. So that's all just to, lay a foundation. This is a new relationship we're experiencing here, where you're hearing so much of my life and you're seeing me unpack what have become my guideposts, my guiding lights. But I guarantee you, I will evolve and grow too, because that's the nature of being human. And I welcome your input. I never am offended if you challenge one of my ideas. All questions can go on the table. I will never feel threatened by a comment that you make that is contradictory to something else that I've said. This is how we grow. And this is how you become the person that will make the unique contribution that you're intended to make. So thanks for letting me make one. Making a contribution. Feels good. Okay, so I promised you we would start, so here we go. Learning to read. And my PowerPoints are getting better, right? I have a new printer. Here you go, by the way. Okay, learning to read. I'm outside, so I had to use sticky notes. And really, it's not that I don't know these things. I just don't want to lose track. Oh, yeah, part of the reason for these cards is so if you have to leave early and you're going to watch this on replay on catch.me/BraveWriter, you can just fast forward and look for the card. You can look for the point where we left off, and then you don't have to rewatch everything I said if you don't have time or don't want to. Okay, so here we go. Learning to read. The easiest thing to do with your children, right? Not. I had 5 kids, 5 different reading ages. My oldest child, Noah, he read at about 8. So a little late, but not really troubling. He wasn't that interested. And oh, somebody just cried about reading. Well, good. I hope this helps. So Noah, we would do I had a great big easel and I used to put it out on our balcony and we would work on, the vowel sounds, the consonant sounds. I kind of followed a Ruth Beechick model in the very first years of my homeschool life. And he was basically not interested. And I tried to get him to do Hop on Pop and the Dr. Seuss books. Not really interested. But he was understanding. He just wasn't committed because Noah had too many things to do. So anyway, that summer when he was just turning 8, there was a library reading program that gave you stickers and gummy bears and all these different things. Oh no, there go my notes. Let me grab them. Hold on. Oh, I knew this would happen. It's windy. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. Can't lose my notes. So the second that we started this library rewards program, he got motivated. And within a month, he was able to do it. He was able to read. So all that programming into that end of the year resulted in reading once he was motivated. And this basically is the story of Noah's life. Johanna, though, was a completely different animal. She woke up on her 5th birthday and said out loud to me, "Yay, I'm 5. I'm going to learn to read today." And then 3.5 years later, she read. Okay? It's much harder with a child who wants to read and isn't finding success. So we spent all the time that I knew how to spend teaching her to read. And of course, I tried multiple programs. I involved a tutor. And it wasn't clicking. It was really weird. She'd read a book, and then the next book she couldn't read. And they were comparable in difficulty. I discovered one day I started observing her. I just watched what kind of person is Johanna. And what was going on is this. She was very artistic. And it suddenly dawned on me that maybe the differences between fonts were causing problems for her. It was as if she could read one book written this way, but if it was a different font, it was like a whole new alphabet to her. And sure enough, that's what it was. We started going through like a newspaper or a magazine, and I'd point to these various letters. She couldn't tell that an A was an A was an A was an A. Manuscript, typeface, cursive, these were confusing to her. So once we established that that was the problem, I was able to have her start identifying the alphabet in all these different sources, and she read like that. Just overnight. Suddenly it all clicked. I didn't know that this was a thing. And in fact, the specialist I was working with didn't know that was a thing either. It came from sort of our combined conversations and my patient observation that I uncovered this. So she was about 8.5 when she read. Jacob was my third child, and I was pregnant with Liam when he was about 7. And we were given this reading program in California from our charter school that had been developed by Pleasant T. Rowland, the woman who created the American Girl dolls. I don't know if you know this, but she was a reading specialist before she was ever American Girl dolls. And that's why she loves pairing these books with these dolls. So she created a whole curriculum, and I didn't have time to teach it to Jacob. He taught it to himself, literally. And he learned to read at age 7 with almost no help from me, which has been the story of Jacob's life. Liam learned to read because of math. Not math as in mathematics, but as in spelling is the same as math. He started decoding, and one day at age 6, he ran into my bedroom and he said, "Gap, G-A-P." And I said, "Where'd that come from?" He says, "There's a bag outside your door and it says Gap." And I thought, oh my gosh, my kid is reading. I brought him downstairs the next day and pulled out a reader, and he was reading. I don't know exactly how he learned, but I think he overheard a lot of what I did with Jacob, and he was that sort of introverted kid who was just surveying the world and adding things up. So he learned at 6. And then came Katrin. Katrin did not read until she was almost 10. This is my 5th child. I have succeeded 4 times and nothing worked. How many of you have discovered you think you know how to teach reading, and then you have a child who suddenly doesn't cooperate with whatever systems you've attempted? I'm assuming that's a lot of you, and that might be why you're here. And if you have a friend who has that situation, share this with them right now, because I'm getting ready to talk about what to do. Yes, it's terrifying. You start to think, oh my gosh, what is wrong with this child? And in Katrin's case, there really was nothing wrong with her. She was eager to learn. We did a lot of what I call starting and stopping, and that's one of my principles. Take breaks from teaching reading. So you can teach for a period, maybe a couple months, you're doing some program with phonics and sight words, and then when they hit the threshold of frustration, take a month or two off. This was counsel I got from specialists. This wasn't just my own laziness. This was what I've heard from people who teach struggling readers, because the brain needs time to catch up and to develop. And so the maturity actually is an aid to your struggling reader. So go ahead and deposit and then take a break, and then deposit and take a break. One of the things that we did with Katrin is she literally started memorizing books because she wanted to look like she was reading. This was really critical to her. She had 4 older siblings who read and 2 parents who were big-time readers. And so one of the things that we started doing is I did let her memorize books so that she could read. She sort of got the feel for what was on each page, and that felt really good to her. Someone else mentioned in an email to me, Danny said, what happens if your child skips words or puts words in that aren't there or invents a meaning for a word? Well, in my opinion, and I'm not a specialist, but in my opinion, this is just like learning to speak. They are taking the abstraction of language and they are attempting to make meaning out of what they see coordinated with the pictures, especially in picture books. And so that is reading. There is a pre-literacy for visuals, and then there is a pre-literacy for words. And when your kids see a picture and they make a leap or a guess, that is a kind of literacy. It's not unrelated to reading. So just know that. Know that when they're trying and they're memorizing and they're coordinating and, you're running your finger underneath the words, there is a reading practice that they're developing, and it's all valid. What turned the switch for Katrin, though, was a shock to me, and I didn't know that this is what it would take. We had some battles over sounding out because I was shocked that she wouldn't sound out. I would give her an example. I would say, pa up, ha up, trying to help her sound out. And she refused. And then we would both cry because I would blame and shame her. And then she'd feel really upset. And then I'd have to back off. And then I'd have to do my little apology thing that every parent has to do. And I learned over time that, of course, that wasn't effective. And so one of the things that happened is I stopped requiring her to sound out. One day, serendipitously, she asked me if she could learn Chinese. And I was like, Chinese? The language? And she said yes. And being the eager homeschooling mother that I was, I went ahead and plunked down the big money for Rosetta Stone, and we brought the Chinese home. And she still remembers some of that Chinese. I didn't find out till years later. She was hoping that she could learn the characters, the kanji, from Chinese, because then she wouldn't have to learn the alphabet. Can you believe that? That's how much anxiety she had about reading. I didn't know that's what was going on. And so it kind of broke my heart when she finally told me that. Fast forward a few more years, maybe months or years, I started studying Greek myself, old, like New Testament style Greek. And I was studying it in my graduate school program. And Katrin was totally fascinated. She was, in her own mind, without telling me, rooting around for a way to learn to read because she had given up on English. Didn't know that. She thought you're supposed to see the words and read fluently because that's all the people in her life. That's what they all did. Well, I started studying Greek. She got interested in the characters, in all of the letters, and we decided to make place cards for Thanksgiving in Greek. I had to sound out the letters to write our names, and it clicked. She suddenly saw me struggling to sound out words, and that translated into her own reading journey. And literally within a month, she was reading. I think what pushed her over the edge was wanting to know what happened with Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey. She had Some People magazine and made herself read the paragraph. but it was after she finally had permission inside to sound out. Now, here's the interesting thing about having gone through 5 completely different strategies for reading. They all started reading at different ages, but none of them read chapter books till they were 10, including Katrin. Katrin started with chapter books. When she learned to read, she jumped in. She was as fluent as any of my other kids at 10, weirdly. And so I don't know if this is true, but one of the things that I've observed is that the maturity and patience to read a chapter book kicks in for some kids at 9 or 10, even if they've been reading since 4 or 5. So it was an interesting thing to me. I don't feel like she lost ground the way that I was worried she might be. And of course, just to fast forward all the way to today, she and I were text messaging because she's getting ready to study in India next summer and is studying Hindi in college and is a linguistics major. That is the daughter who read the latest, who attempted Chinese, who studied New Testament Greek for a year, and speaks French. She is studying German, French, and Hindi simultaneously right now. I just wanted you to know the end of that story because how awesome is that? Her major is linguistics, and her dream is to work for dictionaries. So this is the kid who read the latest. So anyway, of course now I've used up like half our time on my own children. So let me power through these points, and we may have to divide this into 2 because I just don't see how I'm going to get through all this in an hour. Okay. So what are some principles for learning to read? Yeah, tap. Thank you for the hearts. I appreciate you tapping them up. I will tell Katrin that you guys appreciated her story. All right. So here are the principles for reading. Read to your kids early and often. Start when they're toddlers. Start when they're babies. There's nothing wrong with reading to a baby in the womb. Reading needs to be normative in your families. It doesn't have to be long, and it should involve a variety of means. You can read texts from your husband to your children, or texts from your mother to your kids. You can read books. You can read grocery lists. You can read factual information from Google after you look something up. Read from a variety of sources and see reading as a resource for finding out what you need to know. And do this with your kids early and often. Make books easily accessible. Put them on bookcases, stick them in baskets, tuck them next to your children in bed, give them for gifts. My mother was famous for buying each child a brand new book at Christmas every year that was hardcover. I happen to have all hardcover copies of the Little House books when they were $3.95 a piece. One of my most treasured possessions. So give your kids books, put them in baskets, treat them like accessories. I'm all for Kindle. I love the Nook, but there is something about seeing books. They tend to be hidden in Kindle. So having physical books around is important. I believe in it. When you are reading with your young children, run your fingers under the words. You don't have to do that at age 1 and 2 necessarily, but as they start getting to the age where they could read, that is a valid principle to start drawing their attention to the fact that what you're saying is actually represented on the page. You don't have to explain that. You can just live it. This was a principle given to me. I guess I need to go this way. I'm going, for you, it looks like I'm doing Arabic. This is for English. As I was told by Rita Savasco, she said there is something about running your finger across underneath the words that you are starting to help them imagine that there is content and meaning that matches the voice. So that's a really good practice to do. It's not my tip, it's Rita's. Rita is our speech and language pathologist that created the wand and works with BraveWriter. When you're teaching the sounds, use the lowercase alphabet. We typically use the capitals, but that is not the majority of the letters they are going to encounter when they're reading. So it's okay to, have an alphabet puzzle that has all capital letters. But if you are going to put up letters in your house to look at or make them out of Play-Doh, I recommend it, or you're going to buy a whole alphabet cookie cutter kit, get the lowercase alphabet, because that's the one they need to learn to read. And you want them as familiar with it as possible. And then I already shared about being aware of multiple fonts. You know, if you are having a child handwrite, doing copy work, they are going to be using a different font alphabet than what they're reading. So in the early days, handwrite what you want your child to copy so that they get to mirror the exact alphabet and they're not copying a type font. You know that weird A that we see in most type fonts? That's not what they're handwriting. That's demanding a lot of a young child. So help them read it accurately and copy it accurately. My lighting is going away. Okay. And then lastly, I'm just going to reiterate, if you suspect a real problem, get help early. There's nothing wrong with going in for a consultation and just finding out. Your kid may even think it's fun. I know when Jake needed speech therapy, he thought it was a blast. He wasn't being pulled out of a classroom and embarrassed in front of his fellow peers. He was the exceptional child in our family who got to have fun with another adult. Okay? So if you treat diagnoses and treatment like a treat, your kids will see it that way. And you don't have to say, well, I'm worried about how you're reading. You can say, you know what? We're going to go meet Rita. She's really fun. She does really cool stuff with reading, and I need to learn how to teach it because I'm not very good at it. Let's go together. Just like that. Okay? That's the attitude to have. Okay. I think I just covered our first point. Okay. So let's move on to number 2. Ready? Reading aloud. Look at that nice mama and her little girl in bed. Yay! Okay, reading aloud. The next step. I think reading aloud is the best part of homeschool. I mean, I love the party school part, but that's a lot of work. I love going on nature trips, but gosh, you have to bring a stroller. Reading aloud's awesome. You just sit in a rocking chair and you enjoy your children and you get all these beautiful words put inside of you and you are taken away, to Machu Picchu and you learn about other cultures and other people, right? That's reading aloud. It's like the heart of your homeschool. Years ago, probably 4 or 5 now, I was at the end of my homeschooling career, and I went out with all of my homeschool alum friends, and we were sitting having olives and drinking wine, like something we never did when we homeschooled. And we were just reminiscing, oh, homeschool's so wonderful. And I went around the room and we said, what's your favorite memory from homeschool? And each person said, reading aloud, reading aloud, reading aloud, reading aloud, reading aloud. And then the last person said, really? You read aloud? We never had time. And this group of very close friends just turned on this, heretic and said, what? What do you mean you didn't read aloud? You homeschooled for 12 years and you didn't read aloud to your children? She said there was just too many other things to do. And so then everyone, backed off because we love her. We don't want to make her feel terrible. But then we just couldn't help ourselves. We all had to start talking about every one of our very favorite books we had ever read with our children, because truly, for most of us, that's the heart of our homeschool. And so here's what I want to encourage you to do when you read aloud. It's very easy to only read historical fiction because so many homeschooling programs are all about that. Someone says, how important is it that the listeners follow along in the story? Oh, great question. When we read aloud, my kids didn't follow along at all. They just played on the floor. So we're just getting there in just a minute, but that's a fabulous question. Reading aloud is the practice of the adult or the audiobook narrating the book out loud and kids listening. So they don't do any reading and they don't have to even follow along perfectly well. They just need to sort of be in the environment of reading. Does that make sense? So here's what you want to do. You want to make sure that you read more than historical fiction. I recommend including some nonfiction, some knock-knock jokes, Aesop's fables, D'Aulaire's Greek myths, even books that are science-y. You might pull out a field guide and look through it for different birds that come to your feeder and read about those birds. What we want to do when we're reading is expose our kids to a wide variety of writing styles. Here's what happens when kids are writing. They imitate what they've heard. So they're really good at writing advertising jingles. They're great at dialogue because they read so much fiction. But if they don't get some rich exposure to nonfiction, when we go to ask them to write a report or write nonfiction, it's like that tune doesn't live in their imagination. They don't have an ear for it. So incorporate some nonfiction into your daily read aloud time. I beg of you. Please do them that favor. It will help them so much when they take writing classes. The other thing you want to read aloud is your children's writing. And if you know BraveWriter or me at all, you know what a big priority I put on valuing your children's writing. Do not take their writing and put it in what I call the homeschooling tomb, aka your big official notebook that you share at the end of the year with your evaluator. No, stick their writing right inside the reading basket so that you pull it out right after one picture book. You read what your child said, you put that in and read the next picture book. And your child is as much of an author as Kate DiCamillo or any of the people that you enjoy reading, okay? You will be shocked at how much they love this. Johanna used to create these little books, and I would have a stack of them, and we would just read them every day when the toddlers went to bed. She just loved being read to from her own writing. Every child loves that. I even remember being on an email list in the early days of the internet with Charlotte Mason, and one of the email list owners, she was a little older than me. She had a son who wrote some book on tanks, I can't remember, military or something, and she literally organized a book signing at a local Barnes & Noble for him. They printed out multiple copies and only invited friends and family, and those friends and family came to him sitting at some little table, and they all got signed copies of his book. I thought that was beautiful. So you can do stuff like that. All right. What can your kids do while you're reading aloud? Well, they need to be busy with their hands, okay? So put out some Legos, Duplos, Connects, blocks, anything that isn't too noisy, but that keeps their hands busy. We did knitting, embroidery. What else do I have? Coloring is wonderful. Coloring while they're listening. Folding laundry. If you need it done, have them fold laundry while you read to them. Loom bands, wonderful. Yes, putty is perfect. Yeah, my kids, I remember them making all of those little pot holders. Clay is beautiful. Look at these great suggestions. Keep them rolling. And I'll let you just read them and take notes and screenshots, okay? But yeah, these are perfect. You guys get it. You know what to do. If you have a fussy baby, I had several, who could not nurse and listen to me read at the same time, we used books on CD. Now you can do audible books or books on tape, whatever, audible kind of book. Use that. Let someone else do the reading, or only read aloud when that baby is napping, if they nap. The other option is to have the other parent do the reading and do it in the evenings. Teens are not as interested in read aloud, and that makes sense. They're developing a different life. Someone asked about teens. I'm going to talk about them in the high school period. I just read aloud to my young kids, and the teens were just like, in the background doing whatever they do, and they still benefited. Sometimes we listened to read alouds on car drives, and they heard it then. But, teens can read to themselves, and a lot of them want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. The other thing that I also wanted to point out is that reading aloud can be a really lovely thing to do with an individual child, not just a group. I read Jane Austen books to Johanna, and she was in bed when I read to her, and no one else was present. I read books about animals and the mountains to Liam in his bedroom when no one else was present. I read Redwall books to Jacob in his room when no one else was there. It's not possible to do 5 kids and read individually to each one every night, but you can pick a book a year, or a kid a year, and find that connection where you're reading together. There's just something so bonding and lovely about that. Any questions about read-alouds before I move on? The benefit to reading with your kids is this. It tunes their ear to quality writing, and it helps them share in our humanity. They're going to see your reactions. They're going to experience the words, the activity, the emotion refracted through you, and it shapes their humanity. It helps them become better people. So do it. It's one of the great gifts of being a home educator. All right. We're doing so great. Let me get the next one here. Okay, here's our next PowerPoint. Ready? I do love poetry. So what about reading poetry? Well, I'm not going to waste your time talking about poetry tea times, because if you have any familiarity with BraveWriter, you know I'm a humongous fan, and we are working on something very special about poetry tea time that should be ready before the end of the year. So I am very excited about that. You can go to blog.bravewriter.com and search for Poetry Tea Time in the categories and see endless examples of reading poetry, having tea, and tasty treats that families have shared with us. So go there and find out all about it. But the question I often get asked is, how do we read poetry and why do we read it? And, you know, kind of like an apologetic for poetry. So here we go. I want to, someone said that she sobs at the end of Charlotte's Web. Who wouldn't, and how could you not? She was not just a good friend. She was also a good writer. Oh, it's the best. All right. Robert Pinsky is a great American poet. He wrote a book called The Singing School, which is all about how to read poetry and understand it. If you're like a poetry fanatic, this is a required reading book. It's wonderful. So here's one of the things that he says about poetry, and I just thought I'd read it to you. The aspiring poet should read historical poetry partly by feel, not necessarily using a dictionary or glossary like a tourist with a phrase book. The intrepid traveler can learn by listening to the language, eagerly alert to context. Poetry, whether you are an aspiring poet or not, is about being alert to context. It's not about tearing it to pieces and being a scholar. It's allowing the musicality of language and the content of this poem to have its way with your heart, with your soul. I'm going to keep going here because he has so many good. Here's another thing Pinsky says. A poem is free, and it shows its freedom by establishing its own principles. The unique physics and chemistry and atmosphere of a new planet. From a new planet where time turns snow and silk and milk to dusk, or where the sky roars like a lion at my door, or where a meditation on nothing is clinched with observations about national characters, kings, whores, and great men, the familiar world seen in a brand new way. Someone asked, what if I hate poetry? Poetry is usually hated by people who learned about it in school, where you were expected to identify foreshadowing, symbolism, assonance, consonants, and all of these sort of detailed poetic conventions and devices. But what Pinsky says is, poetry is free. It's to be explored. It's to introduce you to a new planet. It's like a new atmosphere for language. Oh my goodness. Don't get me started on poetry. School does ruin poetry. I actually agree with that. Here's what he says about the form of poetry. And as you are listening to me, I want you to substitute the word poetry with homeschool, because this applies to everything I've been teaching over these last several weeks, okay? Here's another way of thinking about body knowledge and poetry. Pursuing excellence, athletes and musicians willingly, even eagerly, submit themselves to tedious, grinding repetition and analysis. They try to cultivate by practice the most effective way of doing each thing, each best movement so reliably summoned that you don't need to think about it in the fluid, immediate, rapid, intuitive performance of your skills. The goal, in a word used by those who work in these pursuits, is to perfect their form. But beyond that process or extending it, true form is creative. As a verb, form means to make or generate. Coaches rightly speak of the best form, but there is no mechanical template. Oh, no ideology, no ideals, no absolute truths. True form is what each person discovers, enhancing and adapting it each time. In keeping with that flexibility, form should be transformative and original. It can elevate the ordinary, resharpen the familiar. Okay, so let's just stop here for a minute because I was freaking out when I read all of this, and I hope it's translating across the screen. We tend to think of poetry and writing and math and science as these systems to learn and master. Poetry has form, but we don't say that we write poetry. We say we compose poetry. It is a kind of musicality of language. The form is meant to be explored, not to be governed by. And if we think about it as a transforming creative experience, the writing of poetry or the executing of homeschool, we are nearer to the expert level of athletics and musicianship. There is a freedom that takes hold when you get to the point where you know what the form is, but your body is suddenly engaged freely. That's true of homeschool. That's true of poetry. Poetry is as much form defying for the sake of surprise and mystery as it is beholden to some notion of poetry. And the modern poets are constantly breaking with the past, or they're breaking with the present and inviting the past back, because all they want to do is surprise you. Remember, surprise, mystery, risk, and adventure. Isn't this stuff amazing? I mean, literally, you could teach every subject that you wanted to cover by just studying poetry. You could get to history, art, literature, mathematics, it's got meter and scheme and all of that. And the relationship of human beings to themselves, to the divine, to nature. Are you kidding me? Poetry is like the bomb. I'm a total poetry fan. Did you know that? Okay. All right. Did I sell you on poetry yet? So what do you do with kids? Here's what you do with kids. Oh, you're ahead of me already. Jack Prelutsky is amazing. Shel Silverstein, of course, amazing. Knock-knock jokes, nursery rhymes, riddles, the 6 silly rhymes. All of those are wonderful. And when you get to the point that you've got kids who are ready for high school level poetry, well then you want to start with, poetry slams or spoken word poetry, something that's cool and current and hip. I remember my 2 older kids joined a poetry club at our local library when they were in junior high. Like, how lucky were we? Totally free. And my kids were writing these cute little poems about nature, about cantaloupe, about my guitar, these little stanzas at home. Then they joined this poetry club. They came home after their first poetry slam. And they sat down, and Noah wrote a poem on what it would be like to be handicapped and how imprisoning that would feel. And Johanna wrote a poem on death. And I turned to them and I'm like, what happened? And they're like, we didn't realize we weren't writing deep themes. So they took this, total teenage turn towards poetry, and suddenly we're deep. Noah, in his very first math test at the local public school for Algebra 1, came out bounding into the car. I was totally paranoid, and I said, Noah, how did your math test go? He goes, oh, it was fine, but I wrote 2 poems. I said, 2 poems? What are you talking about? During the test? He goes, oh yeah, I finished early, so I wrote 2 poems. What? And of course, he got a C on the test because he didn't check any of his answers, but by golly, I got to hear these 2 fabulous poems he wrote when he was supposed to be checking his work. I share that with you because poetry is just huge in our lives, and I hope that now I have incentivized it in yours. Okay, moving along. Who's got the time? Let's see. Holy moly, 15 minutes left. How fast can I go through all these? Well, we're just going to keep going. I am Julie Julie Bogart from BraveWriter, and if you want to share this broadcast, now's a good time because we're heading into the next stage where we're going to talk about motivating reluctant readers. Motivating reluctant readers. Okay, I'm gonna speed through these. We don't have to take so long. If you've got reluctant readers, raise your hand. Put yes or a little thumbs up in the comments. And if you yourself are a reluctant reader, feel free to let me know. Okay, we've got one. I have a hunch there are many. Very good. Reluctant readers have usually a couple things going on. One is they're not fluent readers yet, so it takes work. The other is they haven't found their genre. They just haven't quite discovered like the pure pleasure that reading could be for them. So if they're in the struggling reader category, you're just going to build slowly with them. You're going to help them read. You're going to work on reading. You're going to have them read to themselves. One big help to those kinds of kids is to get a book on CD and let them listen to it and read along in a copy that goes with it. That has an amazing effect on kids who want to be readers but are struggling. But for kids who just don't feel like reading, yes, graphic novels, someone said that is a fabulous entree into reading as well. Graphic novels are fabulous. But here are some ways to sort of promote reading as a culture in your home. Okay, first one is make sure there's a cozy reading space in your house, a blanket, a cozy spot. For little kids, you can literally make like a tent in the corner of a room and put a basket of books and a blanket and some pillows and tell them that they can be in there when they're reading. It's not a place for anything but reading. We had balconies in California in our little condos, and we used to set up reading nooks on the balcony so they could literally be alone. And my kids loved that. So that's an idea too. You can put them in a mud room if you don't live in Southern California. Some part of the house that's private but also has accessibility to family members because nobody really likes to be totally alone. Another way is you can take a book you want your child to read and you can put margin notes in the book for them to find as they're reading. In other words, when they get to chapter 6 and some suspenseful event is about to occur, if you put a note in the margin says, "Come talk to me when you get to this point. I want to know what you thought was going to happen." Well, now your child has this incentive. They kind of want to see, what did you underline? What are your margin notes? And in fact, my kids used to do that for each other. It wasn't just the parent doing it, but they did it for each other in Harry Potter, in whatever books they were reading. So that's another way. Having kids read the same book sequentially so they can have conversations with each other, another way. My kids really got into creating these fake little podcasts where they would have what they called, the one I remember was Interesting Conversations Between Jacob and Katrin. And they would talk to each other like they were on the radio reviewing a book. And so they would read the book together and then they would have this podcast. That's another way. If you want the family to all read together, try lighting a candle and telling everyone that while the candle is lit, you're all going to sit in the room and read. Now, my kids will be the first to tell you that when I tried that, they were mad because my little ones didn't want to be quiet. So I had to modify my approach. What we did is we lit the candle, the older kids read, and I played quietly with the younger kids. They weren't really ready to just page through books alone. So, but that is a way to sort of encourage an environment where we're done with the computers and we're not, running around the house. There's like a quiet space, and keep it short. Don't do an hour, do 10 minutes, do 15 minutes, just so that they get in the habit of reading. I hope everybody has a library card in your family, and I hope you go every week and let people check out their own books, even if they never read them. It's okay if all they do is page through the book or hold it and feel good holding it, or all they loved was the cover. That is how you start to encourage curiosity. It will come, but let them feel some possessiveness over the books they pick for whatever reasons they pick them. And then the last idea is my mom's, and it totally worked for me. It worked for my kids. My mom had a rule that once we were in bed, we could stay up as late as we wanted as long as we were reading. So I did. I read countless books that way because I didn't want to go to sleep. But reading made me tired. So I had the combination of being a reader, but also getting to stay up, but also calming down to fall asleep. And I just think that is a brilliant strategy for encouraging reading. Yes, audiobooks absolutely count. Someone is asking. Absolutely. Because they are still gaining the information and the ear is being tuned to the literature. It's okay, though, to want them to be able to read without audiobooks. And so you may want to balance those. But yeah, they absolutely count. I mean, I count them on my book list. Okay, we're going to move on. Yeah, some people had to sneak reading at night, with a flashlight or something, right? But my mom just went ahead and told us we could, and I love that. I love her for that. Okay, here's the next one. A lot of people want to know the relationship between reading and writing. And so this is what I have to say. Good writing equals a life of reading and wonderful conversations. Okay, can everyone see that? You got a little screenshot if you want to remember this point. So how does writing benefit from reading? Well, two ways. One, you are tuning your ear to quality prose, or to the style, or to the organization of this particular writing genre. That's one way. But the second way is you are intuitively mastering punctuation and spelling. But unlike workbooks, the fruit of that does not show up for about 5 to 10 years. So a lot of parents say, my kid reads all the time, but his spelling isn't improving. Yeah, but that's because he's 12 and he's been reading for 4 years. But by 18, it will have really shown up. And I see it all the time in BraveWriter. The kids who are big readers and spend a lot of time on the internet are actually the best writers. So what you want to trust is that you are depositing all of this information into your child, the fruit of which you will not experience in an immediate payout kind of way. It's going to show up later, but I promise you it will show up. I promise you. It's just axiomatic. You can't not show up, and it does. So just trust this reading process. Now, for some people, the spelling issue is bigger than just reading and copy work and dictation, in which case we go back to our idea, your idea of being able to get help. Someone said, can we hold you to it? Sure. Sure, come find me. Hunt me down. Okay. Now, the conversation piece, I'm so glad that you asked about that. We have in BraveWriter a concept that I coined called big, juicy conversations. I kind of got sick of the word narration. I started watching it show up in classical education and Charlotte Mason sites, and it had become this really weird thing where it was like narrate on command. You read a chapter and then you line up your kids against the wall and then each one has to repeat what they just heard. It's so unnatural, and kids kind of resist it. And they end up saying things like, but we just read the chapter, you know what was in it. And there's this strange feeling of it being artificial. Charlotte brought up narration because she had a class of 20 or 30 kids, and she wanted to make sure all children had the opportunity to express what they learned from what they read or what was read to them. You don't have to worry about that. You got somewhere between 2 and 10 kids, right? So you know whether or not they have read the book. You know whether or not they were paying attention. It is much better to engage in what I call a big, juicy conversation. And what that looks like is, over lunch, after you've read the chapter, you start asking questions like, what do you think's going to happen next? Who are you rooting for? Do you like that character? Oh my gosh, how does this book compare to this other book? Hey, let's watch the movie version and figure out whether they're the same or different and why they made those choices. That is productive narration with children that leads to this huge, huge vocabulary growth, retention of information. Oh, good. I'm glad you love it. Yeah, we should do a scope just on big juicies. But actually, I have a podcast that is called Big Juicy Conversations. That's the title of the individual podcast on my blog. So go look up, podcasts and then listen to the big juicy conversation that I had with Noah about big juicy conversations. It was a little meta, but really fun. Okay, I'm speeding along. Let's get through these. I'm so motivated. Okay, what's next? Yes. I promised you that we were going to talk about high school reading. So if you have friends who are not on this scope yet and have high schoolers, now's the time to bring them in. Okay? Share. You swipe right to left on the iPhone and Android. You swipe up and you hit share. High school readers. All right, so what's appropriate for high school kids? Well, the first thing I always do is I used to Google book lists for 9th grade, book lists for 10th grade. Go ahead and find out what's being read in the schools across America. That is not cheating. That is not betraying your pure homeschooling heart. That is just being wise. It's a good idea for your kids to overlap with high school kids so that when they get to college, they have a shared cultural understanding. They aren't going to read all those books, but they can read some of them. Secondly, make sure what they're reading is diverse authorship. What do I mean by that? Do not have them only reading dead white men. That's what I mean. We want them reading I Am Malala, Maya Angelou, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. We want them having a diverse perspective, and that only comes through a diverse set of authors. So be brave. Involve other voices besides the ones that are from the Western canon. This is how we raise global citizens. This is how we become better human beings. So first point, Google book lists. Second point, diverse authorship. Third point, diverse places and times. You want to read about the whole world, not just what happened in Europe or in America. I hope that you pick books that are set in China or set in South America, or that detail a different time period and in a different part of history that you don't know much about. This is how our kids also gain an experience of history, not just information about history. Okay? So, we now have Google book lists, mix of authorship, diverse places and historical periods. Don't forget to read modern books. Modern books are awesome. This is perfectly valid for home education. We are not only about ancient literature. We are also about modern writers. And I trust you to figure out which ones you feel good about for your kids. But they should read them. I remember Noah getting totally into all of the James Bond books. I mean, those are not great literature, but oh my gosh, he got so much out of them. And then when he watched the films, he's like, wait a minute, these are not the same. So modern examples, I won't do that in this scope. But we can make a good list. I'll be happy to help with that. Johanna has a list as long as her arm. So does Noah. So does Jacob. But thank you for asking. That's a great question. And then lastly, don't forget about nonfiction and short stories. Those are also important. You can use popular nonfiction, like Michael Pollan when he talks about the omnivore's dilemma, or Everything Bad is Good for You, which is all about the gaming industry, or Nickeled and Dimed, trying to live on, a minimum wage. These are interesting sort of popular experiences of nonfiction, which are very valuable for kids, high schoolers. And short stories, absolutely. BraveWriter occasionally teaches a short story class for high school. Any good anthology would be great, and I'll do that. We'll do a scope on book recommendations, okay, because it's just too hard to do it all in this scope. Lastly, they should be reading the internet. I'm sure this is obvious, but I want to just validate that that is very important. Read blogs, read news sites, start to understand the difference between a website that is statistics and information versus a website that has a specific agenda. That's very important for research that they will do in college. So if you can guide that, it's different to look at the statistics from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, than some website that is explaining the problems with a vaccination. Those are two different perspectives, and you want to at least understand what is authoritative and what is someone taking that information now and making a case for a belief, which is totally valid. But they're two different sources, and they are different in how they are used in academic writing. We are closing in on the end of this talk. You guys are so great. You're hanging in with me. Oh my gosh, it's been a whole hour. Should we do the last point? Okay, let's do the last point. I'm going to make it fast, I promise. You are steadfast hanging in here for a whole freaking hour. Okay, ready? So the last point is pleasure reading versus academics. Now, as you can see, this little arrow is like going nowhere, clear but fun. And this arrow is like, dude, I'm going to college. Okay? Am I cutting out? I hope not. We had that problem yesterday. Anyone else besides you? Heart it up if I'm still here. Oh, good. Okay. It might just be individual connections. Yay. Good. Okay. I'm still here. Thank you for the hearts. That helps. Woohoo. Okay. So last one. Pleasure. We'll do it one more time. Pleasure versus academics. Alrighty. Pleasure reading is the gift of being human. Getting to read for pleasure is the gift of being human. You get to enjoy taking time out of your busy, hectic life, entering another world, another perspective, and giving your mind food to consume and digest for the next several hours, maybe a whole day. Have you had that experience? You read and suddenly you're washing the dishes and you're just like imagining that world. And you get to take a vacation from the dishes because you read for pleasure. The biggest gift you can give your kids is reading for pleasure in front of them. Whether that's on a couch or listening to an audio book while they're playing a game, whatever way you can show that reading is pleasurable to you, they will catch it. Oh, I want a Hobbit house too, someone said. Oh my goodness, that's so funny that you mentioned that because literally last week I'm working on, well, I can't tell you exactly, but the writing I was doing started by featuring a Hobbit house. So that really blesses me. I keep feeling like this weird synergy with you all out there. You keep saying things that I'm actually doing in secret, and I'm like, whoa, so good. Okay, so read for pleasure in front of your children, okay? Read a book series as a family. We loved reading Harry Potter as a family. I read some of it aloud. We read some of it ourselves. We listened to podcasts. We listened to discussions. We had parties. The whole family was in on it. It wasn't a kid thing. It was a family thing. People do it with Narnia. They do it with Lord of the Rings. Absolutely. You could do it with all the Little House books. But get the whole family in on one series. You know, you could do Redwall. Oh, somebody said that the fairies inspired them to start a potted fairy garden this fall. That's lovely. Yeah, in fact, reading about fairies and, you know, that kind of energy can be a really fun family project too. And then lastly, continue to have big, juicy conversations about what you read in front of your kids. So maybe your kids aren't reading what you're reading, but you and your partner, your spouse, can at the dinner table have big, juicy conversations about what you're reading. You know, because that's a role modeling for them about what the fun is of being an adult. We want them to look forward to adulthood. Well, we better look like we're having fun being adults, right? So that's what we want to do. Cool. So what about academic reading? You're going to tailor it to the child. They don't have to all do the same thing. But here are the core things that they should do in high school. I already gave you sort of like my philosophy about picking books, but in high school, here's the stuff that you do want to hit. Some British literature, some American literature, and some world literature, okay? Make sure a couple of those each year, like not every year, but 1 year some British, 1 year some American, 1 year some world. And that's what the Googled book lists are for, to help you figure out which of those books. And then keep a really nice running list of all the stuff your kids read, because that's what's going in their transcript. In Noah's transcript, we had a whole page dedicated to books on linguistics and constructed languages, and they loved that at the University of Cincinnati. So make sure you keep a good list. It doesn't all have to be fiction. It can be all the stuff that they're reading that helps them become the amazing college candidate that they are becoming. All right, I want to see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, it's also good to have some kind of experience outside of the traditional subject areas. So like I said, my son was really into linguistics. My daughters read a lot on feminism. I remember Katrin and I worked through an entire book of letters written by women about American history. We did that for 2 years, and it was so fascinating. I'll put that on my list of books that I'm supposed to share with you because it was such a great one. Yeah, so I think we're done. You guys are great. You hung in. Oh, 1010 is wonderful. My kids loved 1010. Great, great, great comic series from France. So, I'm done. Does anyone want to ask a question, or should we just like exhale and be done? And I'm going to have to figure out the music thing because I really wanted music on this one and it didn't work. Oh, good. Yay. I'm glad this was helpful. It's a great topic, right? Reading is the best. It's the core of home education. Awesome. Cool. Woohoo! Oh, so good. Well, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Oh, merci à toi. À toi. Very good. Yes, I will share tomorrow, like I try to do on Tuesday and Thursday, some little piece of encouragement. Maybe I'll get my music to work and we can listen to that song. But take a look at Breathe In, Breathe Out by Jimmy Buffett. It just seems to fit with everything else. Oh, discuss plans with the struggling reader. So let me just sum up, because I feel like I addressed it a little bit. You want to spend time with that struggling reader one-on-one, trying a variety of approaches, because sometimes phonics isn't the right one, but then you want to take breaks. So you dive in and you work with them, and then you take some breaks. And then you dive in and work with them, and then take some breaks. And if you need to pull in a specialist, don't hesitate, because it's good early on to get some strategies, to understand how to guide that experience. But yeah, struggling readers, you know, you'd have to kind of tell me the age. Like I have some people say struggling reader and they're talking about a 5-year-old. And I'm like, let the brain mature. But if it's a struggling reader at age 10 or 11, then maybe get some help so that you feel more confident. Okay? All right. I see people jumping off, so I'm going to jump off too. One quick thing I need to tell you. These sold like crazy. We're having to order the second print run. If you want to get in on our current discount before the end of October, we only have a few left. So buy it now, because I don't know if the second print run of my DVDs will come in before the end of October. This was the code. Oops, 15. Yes, we do have a digital download, so you can buy it that way. You don't have to buy the hard copy. That's exactly right. The DVDs come in both. And if you want to join our homeschooling coaching community, join CoachJulieBogart.com to join the Homeschool Alliance. The DVDs are from my retreat that was here in Cincinnati in 2014. So it's all my core teachings. I talk about nurturing brave writers, becoming a partner to your child in the educational process. We do an extensive thing on the Brave Writer lifestyle. I explore the fantasy homeschool, and then I give a talk on how to work with high school writers. Okay? Yeah, I got what you meant. I knew you didn't mean dads. So that's my DVDs, and you can find out more at store.bravewriter.com. But now I am going to leave you so you can get on with your life. Oh, thank you so much for the comment about the DVD downloads. Wonderful. I'm glad that you're enjoying them. It was so much fun. You can find my past scopes. Thanks for asking. Replays. Catch.me/BraveWriter. Okay, so any that you've missed, go watch them. I think we're almost at 6,000 replay views already, which is crazy town. You guys are amazing. So, live honestly, write bravely. I'm Julie Bogart from BraveWriter. Thanks for watching today.